Welcome to today's episode. Today we have an extremely intelligent and versatile in business guest, Nick Jain. And Nick is the CEO of a very high-tech software company, IdeaScale. He's got quite a different background in many different businesses, from finance to trucking companies to men's shoes to here we are today. I'm very excited to hear the journey. So, without further ado, hello, Nick.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on your show today.
You're welcome. I can't wait to hear your story. The show is free to lead, journeys of leaders driven by passion and inspired by purpose. Here we are today, the CEO of one of the, if not the largest, one of the largest software developing companies. And you didn't start there, right? So, what got you there? What's that journey, if you like?
Just one clarification. We're obviously not one of the largest software companies overall. That would be the Googles and Microsofts. We are for innovation specifically. Yeah.
Yeah.
One day we'll be Google, but not quite yet. So as for my background, it's been quite a journey. I initially was raised by my grandmother in India and a single grandmother raising somebody in a developing country. Quite a bit of a different experience than living in a Western country. I remember as a kid, I had half an hour of running water in the morning and in the evening. And as a 3-year-old, it was my job to go fill up at the house's water tank before the water ran out. As for the rest of my journeys, a bit all over the place, but studied theoretical math and physics, spent about 10 years on Wall Street as a professional investor, really investing in multi-billion dollar private equity and hedge fund deals. Went to business school at Harvard. And then after that, for the last 4 or 5 years, I have been somehow fallen into the role of what I call a professional CEO. Either private equity firms or founders hire me when their companies are either in trouble or ready to be taken to the next stage of growth. And in that role, I have either led or turned around three vastly different companies. One was a $100 million revenue trucking company, so warehouses, heavy equipment moving back and forth. Next was a small $2 million revenue men's shoe startup that was selling and renting really high-end sneakers. And then now, for the past 2 years, I've had the great honor and privilege of running IdeaScale, which we are now scaling to be a truly globally impactful company.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks for the succinct journey along the way there. What were your challenges? Going from my background, I was growing up in the north of England and I delivered milk all my childhood. So I know what it's like to come from like the earth, like salt of the earth. So I can hear that in you. But here you are at Harvard Business School. Here you are, CEO of a multi-million dollar company or several of them. What's been your challenges to go from where you were to there?
Sure. So there have been a lot of challenges, right? Firstly, just to be frank, a lot of folks who end up at places like Harvard Business School are coming from extremely privileged backgrounds. I had classmates whose parents were extraordinarily wealthy or the heads of state. And a lot of those folks show up with the right networks, right? Even ignoring their last names, they show up with the right networks to get access to the corridors of power or to get the call for the CEO job. For me, it's been much more focus. My success has really been driven by grind. I'm a strong believer that kind of continuous focused effort towards a goal opens up doors that may be a little bit closed otherwise. I've ended up here really through just aggressive hard work. I've proactively networked throughout my life and built relationships. Um, I'm a strong believer in principles-based leadership. So I think turning around companies, I think I've very much focused on truth with a capital T on what actually works in businesses and ignored a lot of the fluff or management advice that gets passed around in leadership books. And then thirdly, a focus on creating value for all constituents along the way. I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle with as leaders and that is noticed by the owners of businesses is leaders who can create value for the three core constituents, which are your customers, your employees, and your shareholders. And if you're only doing one of them, the tripod kind of falls over, and that prevents you from really being successful as a leader long term.
I love that piece about truth. I've just finished writing my book. It's going to be coming out in next month or so, and it's called Free to Lead: Shattering Limiting Beliefs, Accelerating Your Authentic Leadership and Business Growth. I love that you said most of these books is lots of fluff and I talk about the truth. Can you tell me more about how that showed up for you or how you cut through there is a lot of fluff, right? What's been the way you've cut through that? Or what would you advise somebody out there who's getting into business or they're in the middle of their business and there's a lot of fluff around them, and people not being straight, people not doing what they said they were going to do, or you hire someone, they don't turn out to be what they purported to be, like that. Tell me a little bit about that truth bit.
I want to be clear. When I say truth, I don't mean as opposed to lies, but as opposed to things that are just made up along the way in terms of running the business. And I'll give a couple examples, but just going back for a moment, I was trained as a theoretical mathematician, and that means we're really focused on identifying that 1 + 1 = 2, it never equals 3, and really deriving things from first principles. And I think that is often missed in businesses. You have a lot of gut feel ways of running businesses or making decisions. I think one of the things that I've been consistent about through the companies that I've run, and including these are core principles at IdeaScale, is we make like logic and evidence-based decisions at each stage of the process. So whenever any decision is made, that could be in marketing, that could be in engineering, that could be in sales, we think about it very clearly and analytically. Is this a positive return on investment decision? Okay. And that is something that can be quantified, right? It is not based on Nick thinks this is a great marketing campaign. It is here's what the math says that this is a good decision. And there's great formula out there. There's lots of people have published how to do this. The thing is, it requires discipline. It requires you to, as a leader, to say, when someone says this feels right, for you to push back and say, no, prove it. And that's an uncomfortable conversation sometimes. And it's certainly a dramatic change in culture for even some of the largest organizations, which are making decisions based on the gut feelings or appeal to authority of senior figures. Instead, demanding that everything be evidence based, while culturally and personally difficult, is the right way to make decisions. There's incredible amounts of academic and research evidence on this, that companies that make analytically correct decisions are the ones that win over the long run. But it is difficult to institute that as a culture because it cuts away against the way our monkey brains are wired.
Very good. Love it. I love it. I would say that's honoring the integrity of something. There's feelings, there's emotions, there's circumstances, but what are the facts? What is the actual black and white? And you put that down and you apply your statistics to it, and you can do something with that. You can't, if you don't know what's actually there, what are you going on? I wouldn't back on that business. So
Yeah, but so many people do is the funny thing, right? Because you have such a charismatic founder or someone who's incredibly well spoken. And yet you have, how do you figure out the value of the person's idea if you're just relying on charisma? Can you quantify charisma? Turns
yeah,
out you can, but that's a difficult separate task.
yeah. Look, it's so if you've got somebody who's in business or going into business, there's some rules in there, right? That you have discovered for yourself. You might read it in books, but you've discovered it I can tell, on the ground floor. You've actually discovered, give me the facts. And that takes a certain courage to, I imagine, when you're starting out or you just arrive at a company. Have you had any stories like that you could share with us?
Lots. Look, I started my career in private equity and hedge funds, which are very hierarchical organizations, right? Where the especially the senior people are extraordinarily wealthy. They've been extraordinarily successful, and when you try and distinguish luck versus skill, right? When you ask them, "Hey, why do we do it?" and their response is, "Well, this is what made me a billionaire or a 100 millionaire." That's not a actual response. That's a classic logical fallacy called an appeal to authority, where you're saying Einstein said this, therefore it's true. That's not an argument. So look, I certainly got in trouble in my kind of the early stage of my career when I would ask why, because I didn't understand or didn't make sense to me or I thought it was wrong, and I would get gut feel responses or this is the way it's done or just do it this way, which is not a great inspiring way to teach a young person coming up through their starting their career, but it's also not actually true, and it perpetuates bad habits throughout an organization, right? Just because you've been doing something the way it's done doesn't mean in fact it was ever the right thing to do in the first place. Or it may have been right 30 years ago, but it's not right today. Using a typewriter was a great idea 50 years ago. Using it today, just because you've been doing it for 50 years, is a terrible idea. So that throughout kind of early in my career, I would ask this why, like, why is it being done? Explain this to me. Let's walk it back to first principles. And that just often got me in a ton of trouble or did not win me any favors or friends. And I certainly had trouble navigating that and preventing that behavior from destroying my career early on. But having that behavior later in my career now, where I'm in a senior position of power, is actually really meaningful because it prevents me from perpetuating some of the bad habits that I observed in throughout a variety of companies. And it allows us just to be differentially better operators than our peers or competition.
Great, great. So it's definitely something that you've figured out really works for you. What's been one of your biggest challenges?
Sure. I think it's from a people management stuff. When I'm managing, let's say, mid-career professionals or younger professionals, it goes back to that asking why, right? They've never encountered a boss who asked them, like, why are you doing this? Or why are you doing it this way? And so it seems unusual, or that I'm the crazy one, or that I'm the one who's breaking with best practice, rather than them appreciating, wait, a lot of what they've learned from other managers is often bad leadership practice, and we are instead at IdeaScale trying to run like an extraordinarily well-run, high-performing organization. So trying to explain and teach younger folks that, hey, you have to unlearn these bad habits that have been taught by managers who are operating based on gut feel and emotions rather than analytical, good business decision thinking. That is a challenge, and it's a long journey in rewiring people's brains to actually make good decisions, which are hard, by the way. Good decisions in life are hard, not just in business. And our brains, again, going back to our alligator brains or monkey brains, whichever analogy you prefer, aren't designed to do like good analytical thinking. They're designed to make quick, rapid, emotional decisions, the fight or flight response, like type one thinking in Kahneman's words, not type two.
Yeah, excellent, excellent, great. So that's one of your challenges. Have you had any, like what you would call big failures that you had to sort yourself out and come back from?
Lots, obviously, right? I'll point out two. One was I started a small hedge fund. So I was in my late 20s. I had this great idea. I'd actually run it very successfully at another institution I was working at. And I said, look, why am I doing this for somebody else? Let's go do this under my own, kind of raise my own capital, and I can scale up the idea because I thought it was bigger than the other institutions appreciated. So I raised a small amount of capital. The return profile was actually quite good, but I wasn't able to raise capital. To be in the hedge fund game, you need to be able to raise 50 or $100 million, and no one was willing to write me that check. So I struggled at it for about a year or two, burned out most of my life savings. Thankfully, I had a wife who was supporting me through that and was emotionally there for me. But the fund, I just never was able to scale up that fund, and I shut it down right as COVID was hitting. So you can imagine that is an incredible, you're shutting down your first entrepreneurial venture, you're young, you're unemployed, COVID is hitting, no one is hiring. So that isn't just a huge like emotional hole to be in. And again, thankfully I was able to crawl out of it with the support of my wife and just grinding through life. But that was one major failure that, and there've been many along the way.
And what was the piece of gold in there? See, for me, I failed a lot at different things. And at first I used to resist it or feel shameful about it or I'm not good enough. But actually I started to learn. That's when I learn. That's when I really discover something. Because I thought I knew, but wow, no, I didn't. So what would you say the gold was in that?
It was a hard one lesson, but I think I assumed that people managed going into starting a hedge fund business or an asset management business. I assumed that people manage their money rationally, and which may be a crazy assumption to anybody who's not in their 20s. I assumed everybody, especially people with lots of wealth, whether it be universities or pension funds or rich individuals, manage their money rationally. They try and maximize outcomes, they make evidence-based decisions. No, turns out money is very managed very emotionally, which now in retrospect seemed very obvious to me. But at the time, that was a huge mistake because my entire pitch was I figured out a better way. I have all this evidence for why this is a better way to manage your money.
Yeah.
And turns out nobody cared about any of that. They cared about who was standing in front of them, how emotional is the pitch. It was much more about the emotion connecting with me rather than the evidence I presented, which was, again, mind blowing to me. In retrospect, it seems obvious. Like, obviously, people manage their money emotionally, not rationally. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all these financial advisors, because if everybody made the right decisions, you don't need a financial advisor in the first place.
Very good. Very good. Great. And what was the other one? You said you had two.
Yeah, the second one was getting into business school. I initially did not get into business school. I worked my butt off. I had a graduate near the top of my class in college in one of the hardest majors. Worked at all these prestigious companies. Applied to business school at Harvard and said, "Hey, I think I have a great story. Grew up dirt poor, made my way into great colleges, worked at all these great institutions. How many guys like me do you get?" And they basically said no. And so that was really disappointing to me, right? Because I'd worked my butt off to get into a place like Harvard, and they basically told me no. However, I did not accept that as as a response. Going back to what works for me, I strongly believe in effort and grind. And so I called up a whole bunch of alumni and said, "Hey, I've worked my butt off for this. Can you write in letters to the admissions office?" And so I started a letter writing campaign of Harvard Business School alumni who wrote in letters to me that, "Hey, this is guys the greatest thing since sliced bread. You should let him in." And that's how I got in. It was incredibly disappointing again, but it was a kind of a testament to how hard work does work in real life or taking alternative pathways.
Yeah, it's not just hard work. You reached out to and to your network, which is in business is it's a lot to do with relationships.
Hmm.
Yeah. So you leverage your relationships to support your case. That's
Hmm.
how I hear it. That's how I hear it. What about yourself?
I think a lot of people have networks, but a lot of people are not willing to draw on those networks because that requires a certain amount of humility. It requires a certain amount of self-effacement and requires an admission that, hey, I need help. And
Mm,
that's really difficult for a lot of people to say. For me, I think that's a little bit easier to say because I know that I've needed a lot of help throughout my life, right? A lot of my success has been driven by investments that have been made by my grandparents, my parents. And so it is okay for me to ask for help because I realize that I will always need help through all stages of my life. We all do.
beautiful. I can imagine your grandparents listening to this and hearing where you've come in life and the lessons you've learned, and you're not even old. You know what I mean? You've still got so much more in front of you. And if you keep bringing those principles of getting the facts, and the sky really sounds like it's the limit for you.
Unfortunately, my grandparents have passed, but like one of the
Mm.
last things my grandmother was able to do in her life was attend my business school graduation, which you can imagine for somebody who grew up as a single parent in colonial India, right? Back before India was a developing country. That is quite a life trajectory. Go from a single unmarried woman with a daughter all the way to having a grand in a developing country to having a grandchild graduate from a Western business school is certainly a tremendous moment for her. And it was a life goal for me to have her at that event. Yeah, I've got a long ways to go. IdeaScale was on a great trajectory, right? We're in this really amazing place where large organizations are realizing that they need some sort of innovation software. They have financial software, they have sales software. Why don't they have innovation software? I think that realization is starting to come in these large organizations, which puts us in a really good place for growth. We've experienced that. That's why we expanded. And that for me obviously creates a lot of trajectory and growth because I'm really excited to be at the helm of IdeaScale and continue to grow it as we continue to be more and more global and more impactful.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. It's so moving about your grandma. Just imagine her joy to see you graduate.
Mhm.
You know? Just so
Yeah,
moving.
it was a tremendous moment just for the family.
Yeah.
For because 100 years of effort had gone into that moment. If you think about it, just truly long term.
Yeah. Brilliant. And just for those of you not into IT that are listening, what's innovative software? If you can give it in layman's
Yeah.
terms.
Think about it like this as I would describe us as like the TikTok for ideas or the CRM for ideas. So right now, if you're a large organization, how do ideas get passed around on pieces of paper, on Excel spreadsheets, maybe Google Forms? You email them to your boss and they get lost somewhere. What our platform does is every company in a company, it could be an employee, it could be a customer, can drop in ideas about how the company can get better. And those ideas are upvoted and downvoted, and ideas go viral in a very social way. So, in the same way that a really cool TikTok video from China will rise to the top, and that's what's on the top of everyone's TikTok video list, or the cutest cat photo on Instagram, the best idea rises to the top of our platform amongst thousands of ideas. And those could be ideas from very serious, hey, here's a new business strategy, to more, hey, here's a new product, to something as silly as here's a new snack we should have in the kitchen. And this allows all of the people in an organization, whether that be really junior people in a satellite office all the way up to the CEO, to have their ideas in a level playing field and for best ideas to rise, really creating an idea meritocracy, which most large companies just don't, or most large organizations don't really have.
Mm. And then do you create software solutions to or from
Well,
those
that's
ideas?
what our software does. We've created the software solution that captures everyone's ideas and allows ideas to be upvoted, downvoted, and to be implemented over time.
Great. All right, great. It's been so great having you on the show. If someone's out there and they want to get in touch with you or your company, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure, two ways. Firstly, our company website is ideascale.com. If you search IdeaScale or innovation, we're almost always the number one hit on Google, so really easy way to find us. Our software is completely free for organizations below 100 users. So if you're a one-person organization or 99% organization, come check us out, totally free. If you're bigger, obviously come be a customer. For me personally, best way to reach me is LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain. I am almost always the first result globally if you search on LinkedIn, and I respond to 100% of messages. So feel free to contact me.
That's great. And obviously, we'll put you down in the comments below. And it's Nick Jain, Jain. Nick, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your things you've learned along the way and your wisdom. And I just look forward to hearing more about you as you progress.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Will. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.